Friendship, I think, first and foremost, has to do with ultimate concern in Islam. I think it has to do with this sense of a teleological goal, even if that goal is understood theologically to be ineffable, meaning God can never be fully understood or articulated. But the journey toward that ineffable one is central to what I think the Quran, at least in the Islamic tradition, understands friendship to mean. And I think that the second piece of friendship is love. And it's not a Hollywood kind of love or a Bollywood kind of love, but I think it's a love that places the well-being and the journey of the other on at least the same level of importance as one's own journey. And so this is what sometimes I call, when I'm working with the Muslim community, learning to love as God loves, in a way that is liberating and in a way that wants to see the other flourish. Now, of course, the Islamic understanding of flourishing is not necessarily a material concept of flourishing or a contemporary notion of a career path, but it's about a kind of a holistic notion of well-being, and a well-being that can only be found in relation to the divine. And so I think that these two things, this sense of a journey toward transcendence and a friendship based upon the force of a liberating and illumining and restoring love. I think that these two principles are really the foundations for a discussion of friendship within Islam. And so, and again, while there are many kinds of friendship, we have badminton buddies or bowling buddies or soccer buddies, or we have friends with whom we share preoccupations. I think that the real sense of friendship within Islam has to do with something much more sublime and something much more universal. And so I think there's no way for us to discuss friendship outside of that transcendent context within Islam, and that core restorative ethic, meaning that we are all in this world between the gardens. We are all engaged in a restorative journey toward the one whose presence is our realization or restoration as human beings. The friendship with God is categorically different than human friendship, just because a friendship with God implies no transformation on God's part, right? So it's more of a one-way dynamic, I think, in terms of its transformative value and content. Whereas human friendship, I think, seeks mutual transformation and is a constant process of not just encouraging one another to do good and to be good, but to sometimes challenge and interrogate one another. This is one of the reasons why I often will integrate the Jewish notion of the Chavruta study partnerships in my Quran classes, is because I think that it reflects very much the same kind of ethic. It's not an ethic of always having one another's back, whether even at times when we need to be corrected and interrogated. It's rather a form of friendship that assumes mutual interrogation and not always mutual agreement on things. And so I think that the notion of friendship with God rests or stresses, I think, more this idea of love. And so that love, I think, in the Quran is most highly expressed in the names of God, which are perhaps the most repeated and most celebrated in the Quran, the Rahman and Rahim, these two names which come from a three-letter equation in the Arabic, Ra, Ha, Mim, which means literally the uterus or the womb of our mothers, and which are the place in which our lives began. And so these two divine names speak of a love that can only be compared in human terms to the love of a mother, a love that implies unconditionality, a love that is nurturing, a love that is certainly not on our part deserved or merited. It's just the fact of God's existence and our own existence. And so that love then becomes I think core to the notion of friendship with God. And that love doesn't require that we interrogate God, but it allows for that interrogation. And this is why Abraham, right, Ibrahim in Arabic, upon him be peace, is celebrated as God's friend, because he kind of exemplified this notion of friendship with God, an intimacy which even allows for interrogation and for questioning. And so this is, so I would say that divine friendship with God is different than our notion of friendship with one another, but we nevertheless, I think, are given license to speak of it in this way. So it is true that examples going all the way back to the prophetic period exist for affection and esteem beyond the boundary of religious confession. But I think that traditionally our communities have lived slightly more insular lives. And so while we have tremendously cosmopolitan moments within Islamic history, from Andalusia and medieval Baghdad, and we do have moments of really very impressive cosmopolitanism from history, and those cosmopolitan moments did give rise to sometimes very powerful and mutually transformative friendships between Muslims and peoples of other faiths. And I'm even thinking now of the philosopher Al-Farabi, who was the first Muslim student for Nestorian Christian philosophers, for monks really, but who were philosophers in Baghdad, and then became the head of the Alexandrian philosophical school in Baghdad himself, and passed it on to a Jacobite Christian who was the star student in the next generation after him. So we have these stories of teachers and students and friends, and I cite some of those both in my own experience as well as in the history of Islamic, in the history of Islam. But I think that the current moment is a moment of certainly much more dramatic multicultural interaction and collaboration and opportunity than anything that the world has seen to this point. And even though I think on the streets, there is still a prevailing attitude that religion creates conflict and not friendship between peoples who are of different faiths, I think that we are seeing more and more collaboration and mutually transformative encounter happening in the world right now. And this conversation is certainly an example of that. And so I think that while examples can be cited both from history and from the current moment of such friendships, I think that what's perhaps most or more important for us to do is to highlight both the possibility and the promise of this kind of friendship, and to really pursue it, so that people having this same conversation a generation from now will be able to cite us and to cite our collaborations and friendships and support, which stands in defiance of some of the political forces and cultural forces which would want to deny us that religious right and privilege.